For this tutorial, I'm going to go over a condensed version of frequency separation skin retouching. And so what we're going to be doing is taking an image like this, which is a typical high school senior portrait with a young man with acne, to something a little bit more smooth like this. So like I said, this is going to be a very straightforward condensed version of this very, very powerful technique. To begin with, we're going to open the image in Photoshop by hitting the Command E button to launch in Photoshop, or Control E if you're on a PC, and we're going to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. So we've gone in and we've done our post-crop vignette, we've cropped the image, we've done our basic color correction, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Edit button here, and I'm going to select Edit Copy with Lightroom Adjustments. Now that we have our image open in Photoshop, I'm immediately going to make two duplicate copies of the background layer. The first duplicate layer, I'm going to go up under Layer, Duplicate Layer, and I'm going to change the name and call this Low and hit OK. I'm immediately going to duplicate this again, and I'm going to name it High. What this is going to do is allow us to separate the retouching of the texture of the skin versus the color of the skin, and that's the frequency separation technique in a nutshell. So the high layer is going to be where we adjust the texture, and the low layer is where we're going to adjust the color. To do that, we're going to now turn off the high layer and select the low layer. And I'm going to apply a blur filter. So we're going to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to adjust. I'm going to click on the eyes because that's kind of the most important detail that I want to preserve. And so I'm going to adjust the radius of this filter just to the point where I can no longer make out the outline. See right there, I can't really see the circle, the iris of the eye. And so I'm going to adjust this back just a little bit where I can just make that circle out in the eye. There is no perfect number to put in here for radius because it's an adjustment based upon the resolution of your file. It will take more pixels for a higher resolution file to get that adjustment. Also, each image is different, so I can't give you a recipe, but I can tell you what to look for as you're doing this process. So 7 pixels works pretty well for me here. Now I'm going to click on the high layer and activate it so we can see it. I'm going to go up to Image and Apply Image, and I'm actually going to select, I'm going to move this out of the way so we can see what we're doing here. I'm going to select that low layer that's blurry, and what that's going to do is create a texture screen, so to speak. I want to show you real quick how to tell what your color bit depth is on your image. All you do is you go to Image, Mode, RGB, and down here you'll see whether you're in 16 bits per channel or 8 bits per channel. And depending on whether or not we have an 8-bit color depth or a 16-bit color depth, we're going to make some adjustments here. In this image we actually have a 16-bit adjustment, so we're going to set our layer to low. We're going to hit the invert button. We're going to change the blending mode to add instead of subtract for the 8-bit. We're going to set the scale to 2, and we can see that the image is somewhat grayed out and it's kind of separating out what's the texture versus the color. The next thing I'm going to do is apply a high pass filter to this layer so that I can separate out the texture even further. So I'm going to go to Filter, Other, High Pass, and again I'm going to go click on, I'm going to drag up here, or I can just see this rectangle box, I can just drag this in here and I can see no effect and I can bring up to where I see kind of a texture effect, and I'm just looking for how sharp I want those eyes to be in here. So I'm just really paying attention to this area of the screen, and that looks pretty good to me. I might back it off just a little bit. What the high pass is doing is it's really further separating what's a texture blemish that needs retouching versus what's a color blemish that needs to be retouched on the low layer. So I'm going to hit the OK right there. The next thing I'm going to do is change the layer mode to linear light. And what that's going to do is allow me to see the combination of the texture screen with the color layer below. And you can see right there that already has taken care of a lot of the retouching. It's really actually done a pretty nice job for us. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the high and low layers by shift clicking, and I will hit Command G to group those. Okay, let me undo that and show you where that is. If I go under layer and go to group layers, you'll see the keystroke command, Command G, or on a PC it'd be Control G. And what that's allowing me to do is I can expand this so I can see the two layers here within that group, but I can turn the group on and off and see a before and after effect already. So now the next thing I need to do is I'm going to zoom in on the face. And if I hold my space bar, any tool will turn into a grabber or a hand tool, and I can just pull this in here. And now I can click on the high layer, and I'm going to use my clone stamp tool, and I will just select an area that looks like pretty nice skin texture. So I'll select this area right here, and I will just make sure I have the tool set for current layer only, by the way. And what I'm going to do is clone out. I need to set my opacity up a little higher. So I'm just going to clone in good texture over areas that have bad texture. Now that was a little heavy. It got a little too blurry there. So I'm going to come in and I'll just grab maybe something that has a little bit more texture on that side of the face. That blends in a little nicer. I'll keep going back to that source right there. That's giving me a real nice texture. Now I want to undo that for a moment and say make sure I'm not moving freckles. So I'm going to come back here and be a little bit more careful with that and just cover up that area there. Now when I see some areas that look fairly straightforward, I can use the spot healing brush, which is just the J keyboard choice right there, and I can just make sure I don't have sample all layers, so I'm just working on the high layer, and I can come in here and very quickly clean up some of these little blemishes in the skin area here, little textures there. I have to determine what's a freckle and what's not, but I'm just cleaning up these areas just a little bit. This is a pretty extreme skin retouching technique, so I mean, it's just sometimes you have to be very careful you don't go too far. So I'll back that out a little bit. So I have this one area in here that looks a little bit rough, so I'm going to select from, I'm going to use my stamp tool, and I'm just going to stamp and select a skin area that looks pretty good. And I'll just keep coming back to that patch. Part of the challenge is his highlights on this portrait are a little blown out, so there's not a whole lot of texture to work with, but I'm just going back and setting the Option key to select that source, and that's looking pretty darn nice right there actually. I'm just going to come into this chin area here and see if there's anything else we want to fix, and I think that's okay for just this demo right now. So now we're done adjusting the texture of the skin for right now, Now I'm going to select the low layer, which remember this is a layer that's just completely blurred, right? And so what we're going to do is use our B for brush tool, okay? B for brush right here. I'm going to set the opacity to 100, and your flow is usually set to 100, but I'm going to set it down to 5%. This is going to allow me to just paint in. If I had a Wacom tablet and a pressure sensitive pen, it would also help create a more of a brush effect on there. So what I'm going to do with the brush tool selected is I'll see this kind of red blotchy skin area here. So I'm going to option click and select an area of skin tone that I think works pretty well. I'll click on that. You'll notice that that has changed the swatch. Let's do that again. Here's our default black and white. I'll hold down the option key, the eyedropper changes, and now I've got the skin kind of a brown tone in here, and now I'm going to just paint that in until it looks right. Okay, and I can come in and I can select another area in, let's see, I'll come in this area in here. We'll zoom in so you can see this a little better. You can see that it's just got a little bit of a rash, or kind of a redness to that skin, and we can see it over here, and we're just going to add a little bit more of that natural warm skin color in there. I'm going to go ahead and hold down the option brush, get a little lip color in here, and I'll just bring that in, just bring those lips in a little bit more. And you really want to select colors that are adjacent to the area that you're retouching. I may have gone too far with that. I'm going to actually select a new color right in here. There. I think that's pretty good. Now his lip stands out a little bit. In the meantime, let's just do a quick before and after. Look how powerful that effect is for softening and making that face look a little more polished. Now let's talk about adjusting overall tone of this image. I'm going to come in here and do a new adjustment layer and adjust the levels. And I use a levels adjustment layer when I don't want to change the overall color temperature. And what I'm going to do is just pull down this gamma slider in the middle and pull that down just a little bit. And I'm just looking in the skin area here. And you'll notice that every time I use an adjustment layer, the reason adjustment layers are so powerful is they come with a layer mask. And what a layer mask does is controls what I can see or not see on this layer. If it's white, I can see every effect of that layer. If it's black, I can just invert that. Then I lose the effect of that layer. Okay. Let me just show you again. There's the white is showing the layer effect. The black is not. And what that allows me to do is paint with my brush. I'll go back to my default settings here, and I'm just going to lower the opacity of my brush a little bit. And I'm just going to paint white where I want that effect of darkening the area a little bit. You see before, after. It's very subtle. Okay? Very subtle. And then I'll come in here and make the brush. By the way, I'm using the bracket keys. I'm going to use the bracket keys to change the brush to just the size of that eye, and I'll make sure I keep that eye as bright as possible. Before, after. Just adds a little more richness to it. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more of the effect down in the mouth area. Darken this chin up a little bit. Just kind of pull that in a little bit as well. And that's looking pretty good. Now for our overall dodge and burn, I'm going to create a new layer. And for dodge burn technique, I'm going to set a soft light. You can use soft or overlay. Overlay is a little more pronounced effect, soft is a little more subtle. And I'm going to check this box to fill with a neutral 50% gray. And what that's going to do is anything that's 50% gray will not change the pixels below it. But anything that is darker, so I'm going to click on my default colors here, black and white. Anything that's darker is going to make the image appear darker. So if I put black in there, that's going to darken that image, right? Now, I'm going to undo all that by going to Edit, Fill, and fill it with 50% gray, and I'm back to where I was. But what this allows me to do is come in here and just manipulate the tone of this image a little bit, just to pull your eye into the face area. And so I'm just burning in that background, and then maybe I'll open up some areas of his shirt. And again, we can zoom out, just get a sense of what the overall image would look like. And we can turn our grouping. There's our before, there's our after, before, after. And as a commercial photographer, this is very much a more sellable image. Now, if I really want to go back to the overall quality, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go back to the high level. I'm going to adjust and clean up a few more of these textured areas in here. In fact, I see a little bit of a little mark on his nose, a little bit of a spot right there, and we can see where those scratches on the face are. And this is just a really, really powerful technique for handling difficult skin situations. Okay. Probably the next thing I would do, because this image was taken over some pretty gray, overcast day, I'm probably going to add a little bit of warmth to it. And so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and make one more adjustment layer. And this time I'm going to use a hue saturation adjustment. And I can choose a master, or I can choose different parts of the color spectrum. But for now, I'm going to start with master and just go ahead and adjust the saturation a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to go too far, right? That's too far, but it has definitely warmed up the image, and I've got my layer mask and I've got my default colors. Hit D for default colors and X to toggle back and forth with the active color to black, and I'll hit B for brush, and I'm just going to lower the impact of that on the background. And I can go ahead and I like to set my brush, when I'm making these kinds of adjustments, I like to set my brush to 20% so that I can just step it incrementally down. I'd have to click it 5 times to wash out the effect completely. There's before, there's after. Let's zoom in so you can see that. Before, after. And I think for the background, I actually would like the background to be cooler, so I'm going to actually set my brush all the way to 100%, and I will just completely eliminate that and let the skin tone be the only thing that is warmed up by this hue saturation. See, before and after. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to save our file and call it good. Again, we'll look at the before and after, and you can see a pretty significant transformation. And I'll go ahead and hit save, just Command S, and what that will do is in Lightroom it will create another copy of our image. So here's our before and here's our copy. I've done this a couple times now, so I actually have a third copy. You can tell the second iteration didn't adjust any of the hue saturation, and then here's the third iteration of this retouching effect. One other detail that I would go to is I'll go back to Photoshop. We still have the image file open. There's one last thing that I'm going to do, and that is I'm going to create a new layer, new layer, which is Command-Shift-N or Control-Shift-N on a PC. And I'm just going to call this a Retouch Eyes layer. Right now it's a blank layer. And I'm going to come in here and use my rubber stamp tool, and this time I'm actually going to tell it to use all layers. So I'm going to very quickly option click to pick some good skin area. I'm going to make a small enough brush just to cover that shadow area, and it's going to look terrible. It's going to just look terrible for a minute, but it's okay. I'm not worried about it. I'm just getting rid of that line, and just for the heck of it, I'm going to make sure my hardness is back to 0% here. So I'm just going to get rid of that freckle right there. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to select below the wrinkles, and it looks terrible. This is just a very quick and dirty technique. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to lower the opacity of that layer quite a bit. And what that's going to do is allow the original information to show below. I'm going to leave it about 25% here. I never want to completely remove any wrinkles or bags under the eyes unless I'm doing a total glamour retouch. And the reason being is I want to create the texture and three-dimensional quality of the original person. So if I turn that off, you'll see that those if I turn this layer off, you'll see the bags under his eyes look a little heavy. If I turn the layer on, they're still there, but they're so much lighter. So it just softens the impact of that. Let's just back up and take a look before, after, and I'll go ahead and save that version of it as well. So there you have it. We have essentially, we've created 3 versions of our retouching, going from this original image to this image using the frequency retouching but no color enhancements, to this image where we've enhanced the color as well as the skin and retouching of the bags under the eyes. Thank you so much, and give it a try.